In June of 2015, a man entered into the Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and shot and killed 9 people who were taking part in a Bible study there. To commemorate the people, they flew all the flags at half-staff the next day except for one flag, the Confederate flag. This triggered a protest amongst the people of Charleston, South Carolina. Here we have Tyler Parker, who made a documentary about the protest called The Flag. Tyler, how did you come across doing a documentary on this story?
The Hillary Clinton campaign, or recruited to South Carolina to work on the Hillary Clinton campaign, her primary campaign in that state. And on the day of the Mother Emanuel AME Church shootings, I was in Charleston, working on a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton. And I drove home, and one of my jobs was to kind of go through the tweets of the day about Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
Except on this particular day, there weren't a ton of tweets about Hillary Clinton, and there were all of these tweets about a shooting that had just happened in a church in Charleston. And then the news sort of slowly came out that a white supremacist had killed something like 8 or 9 people in a church in Charleston, which was deeply affecting for me because I'm Black and I'm also a Christian. And I had just been in that city, so it just kind of seemed surreal. Then they held a funeral for the pastor of the church, who was also a state senator. In order to honor him, he was lying in state at the South Carolina State Capitol, and all the flags were at half-staff except for a Confederate flag that was a part of a monument out in the front of the State House, because there was a law that mandated that the flag not be altered in any way, except if that alteration had been approved by the entire legislature, who happened to be on break at the time. So there was a big sort of PR disaster in that state, and a large outcry for the flag to be taken down. And then the governor, Nikki Haley, also called for the flag to be taken down from the front of the state capitol. And then I received news that there would be a protest to take the flag down in front of the state capitol. I had my just because I thought I don't know, I just had some kind of feeling that I might run into a topic for a documentary when I flew into South Carolina. I didn't know that this kind of would fall into my lap. So, so I went to that first protest, and then I found out that there was going to be a count thereafter, and it just, in terms of the days that I shot. Also, I didn't enough footage to make a documentary, but when I got back to campus, my professors really liked what I had shot, and I got let into the class, and then I just began the process of editing over the fall semester of my junior year.
Nice. And you really captured a lot of the heated arguments among the crowd. There was like individual one-on-ones between white and Black people. It was very upsetting to see, and kind of, like you said, surreal that over a flag. You know what I mean? Like, it's understanding why people would get upset that they wouldn't bring it down. And yet here there was, other people who were upset because they were bringing it down because it represented something to them. You know what I mean? It represented something different to both people. So I never really knew what the Confederate flag stood for. I just thought it was a Southern flag that represents, the southern part of the country. Do you know what I mean? And then when I saw your documentary, You know, I was like, so what does the Confederate flag represent? I mean, like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just trying to understand.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just trying to get, like, you know, both sides. Like, what. So that flag represented, it was like they were holding up racism. Is that what it is? Because apparently there was a picture of Dylan Roof holding the Confederate flag. And it represents race, not just extreme racism. You know what I mean? And so that's why they. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the flag is the flag, and people place meaning on icons. People place meaning on objects. And so these kinds of conversations are really difficult at times because, I mean, I'm of the opinion that the flag does, in some sense, represent a darker part of American history. I think one thing that's really interesting is the sheer difference of opinion between like the North and the South about what the Civil War itself was actually about. So the North will say that the war was about slavery, and I kind of tend to be in that boat, even though I'm from the South. And a lot of people in the South argue that the war was about states' rights, or about preventing the tyranny of the federal government. And so for a lot of people in the South, that flag represents rebellion. It represents state sovereignty. It represents dedication to one's community and honor. And it represents a way to honor their family members who died in the Civil War. And in the South, you'd be hard pressed to find, particularly a white family, who did not have somebody die in the Civil War, a great-grandfather or a great-great-grandfather or something like that. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody who did not have a family member who died in the Civil War. And for a lot of these families, the Confederate flag is a way to honor the memory of those people who died. But at the same time, the Confederate flag, well, the Confederacy, I believe in the document that declared the quote-unquote independence of the Confederacy, there is a reference to the fact that, like, this war was about slavery in some sense, that the southern states decided to secede because they wanted to keep their slaves. And South Carolina has 30% African American, which is a number that's larger than most any other state. And so you can only imagine what it means to have a Confederate flag, a flag that represents the secession of states on behalf of slavery, in a state with 30% African American population. And I just thought, the reason I decided to shoot too many arguments is because I was sort of curious to know if people would be able to convince each other or even have sound or logical conversations with one another, even though they were starting from two completely different premises, right? One end is starting from the premise that the flag represents racism, and the other end of the spectrum is starting from the premise that the flag represents honor, something honorable, remembering fallen family members and remembering state pride and state history and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, and I just kind of want to see if people would be able to, I wanted to be able to.
Well, let's just say that I think it's hard to discuss race anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like, a lot of people think the more you talk about race, the more it it's going to just upset people when that simply isn't true. Wouldn't you say that's kind of like trying to sweep something huge underneath the rug? Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
There's 4 different kinds of racism. There's subtle racism, which is racial microaggression, and then there's colorism, and then there's internalized racism. Have you ever experienced racism? I mean,
That's an interesting question. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, have you ever experienced racism, like say at Harvard or anywhere, or amongst, do you know what I mean, people or anywhere, if for that matter?
So personally, I think that my experience with racism has been limited, and I think that I've been very privileged in that regard. I know racism is real because I have family members, like very close family members to me, who have experienced racism, and I really can't explain how I'm insulated from racism, or I get at least the kind of racism that I can recognize. I can't explain how I've been insulated from that, but I have been, and I think that that's a blessing. But for instance, my grandfather was the first black mayor of my hometown. I come from High Springs, Florida. It's about 30 minutes outside of Gainesville, Florida, which is where the University of Florida is. And it's in north central Florida, which is essentially southern Georgia. And he used to, he also used to work for the United States Department of Agriculture, and his job was to go from farm to farm in north central Florida, and actually all over the state of Florida, to go from farm to farm and essentially ensure that farmers were abiding by the regulations of the federal government. And so he's doing this job in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, traveling throughout the backwoods of Florida, and there are like real dangers. The Klan was very much still a presence in Florida in the 50s and 60s. My granddad has told me countless stories of people not taking him seriously just because he's a black man, and just completely ignoring his position as an agent of the federal government. He's told me stories about not being able to stay at any type of hotel or motel in Florida while he's traveling, and he would have to find African Americans in the area and stay in the house, like maybe sleep on their couch or stay in their basement in order to do his job.
Right.
And he settled a discrimination lawsuit against the federal government while he was performing that job in the so yeah, I mean just hearing those stories, and I haven't even broken into the stories of racism that he faced when he served as the mayor of my town for 18 years. And it's a small town in backwoods Florida. There just is racism. So I think maybe it's that I grew up in a situation in which my knowledge of racism was always sort of extraordinarily overt. And so I don't think that I have encountered that type of racism personally, that kind of overt racism. Well, except for at the end of my film, where you see the Klansmen screaming at people. That's probably the clearest example of overt racism that I've seen. It was almost funny because it was just kind of cartoonish racism. It was like the kind of racism that you see in the movies, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense.
But yeah, I think that was really the most intense racism that I think I've ever witnessed. I guess microaggressions are present in my lifetime. People will want to touch my hair or and tell me that people will want to touch my hair from time to time, or people will want to make an overgeneralization about Black people and then try to separate me from that overgeneralization. It's saying I'm a good person while everybody else is sort of bad. That happened to me a lot in high school, I think, because I was in a magnet program. And
You mean an honor program?
That's a pretty common. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so people would often say things like, Black people are stupid, but you aren't, or you're not a regular Black person, that kind of thing.
So it's like breaking down stereotypes is what it's about, breaking down the stereotypical types.
Yes.
Right, and former President Barack Obama, I guess, had said that taking down that Confederate flag was a symbol of goodwill and healing and a meaningful step towards a better future.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
Me too.
Because I think that when people can empathize with one another and make concessions towards one another, then we can move forward on some of these extraordinarily difficult questions, especially on questions of race. I think that questions of race, first and foremost, are empathy. And if we can't empathize with one another, then there's no point in talking about race, because we won't get anywhere at all. But if we can empathize with one another, then we can listen to one another, we can communicate with one another. And if we can communicate with one another, then maybe we can find common ground.
Right. It's like that guy in your film. Who was the man that journalist was interviewing about the flag, taking down the flag? And he was speaking, I think it was Nikki, the one that was saying, yes, I know that, that it, if it breaks your hearts, then we will take it down. Who was that?
Yeah, that was a state senator. His
Okay.
name escapes me at the moment. I can probably find it, but
Oh, no,
he,
that's okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just going to say, he seemed to empathize, with taking down the flag after he had stated, what it meant to him, but if it offends people, breaks other people's hearts, then that he would take it down, and that would be empathizing of what you were saying, what you were talking about, empathy.
Right. Do you mean the two male? There's a Black male journalist, and he's interviewing a state senator inside of the state capitol.
Yes.
Is that the scene you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so that's actually an interesting scene because the state senator was filibustering, or I think he was actually a state representative. He was actually filibustering taking the flag down, the bill that would pass to take the flag down, and he was filibustering by introducing a ton of bills. Introducing a ton of amendments to the bill that were kind of not particularly relevant to the issue at hand. So he would introduce amendments to ensure that, like, the Confederate flag monument would be replaced with something else, or that when the flag was taken down, that it was handled by 3 people instead of 4 people, or something like that. So that's just an interesting aside to that character.
Right, and I noticed that they carried somebody away who got hurt. What do you think we can do in the future to, like former Barack Obama said, take steps towards goodwill and healing? I mean, obviously we're going to have to talk about it a lot more, which people are reluctant to do, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing I think we need to do is to be able to agree on facts And that seems a little bit more challenging in our current cultural context. But yeah, I think we've got to be able to agree on facts. We've got to be able to agree that racism still exists. We can disagree on the extent to which it still exists, but we've got to agree that it does still exist. We've got to be able to sit down and listen to one another. And we've also got to be able to recognize that this battle against racism is not going to be solved in a day. It's not going to be solved in a week. It's not going to be solved in a month. Won't be solved in a year. Probably won't be solved in 10 years. We can be optimistic about ending racism, but we also need to be patient. Mm-hmm. And we've also got to be willing to compromise. Both sides need to be willing to compromise in order to take steps forward.
Like the flag.
Big change. Right.
Like the flag,
right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Big change is scary. And I mean, I think anybody would be scared by big change. Mm-hmm. And so maybe a more practical way of approaching these questions is to, I don't know how to say it, is to work with the other side to do what is possible today.
Right. That sounds really good, and it sounds like a step in the right direction.
Yeah. And but that's the other thing, is that even if it's okay to take steps in the right direction, it is also really important to take those steps every day. Does that make sense?
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by taking those steps every day?
I mean that, so you're not, I doubt that we will tomorrow see extraordinary leap in race relations in the United States, right? Right. We might go a step in the right direction, and that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But even as we are being patient with people in the United States, and be patient with ourselves in terms of our situations, to make efforts every single day, mm-hmm. to feel the urgency of making those efforts every single day, to ensure that we keep moving forward towards progress. So that's what I mean. We can take a step in the right direction, but we've got to make sure that we're taking steps in the right direction every day, so that we keep moving towards progress.
Right. Dylan Roof was sentenced to death after, I think it was in December, for the shootings mm-hmm. of those 9 people. Apparently he had like a list of churches, you know what I mean, that he was planning on going to in his car. Somebody found the list of black churches that he was going to visit. Your film has won several awards, no?
Yeah, this film was the first documentary that I made. And I haven't made any other documentaries since, but I've sort of gotten into fiction work.
Oh, really? Fiction work? Good for you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Do you know which one? Did you know which career you're going to go for? Is it government or film or both?
I'm actually less interested in government now and more interested in ministry or film. I'll put it this way. I derive a lot of hope from my faith mm-hmm. on questions of between. And I love film. I always will love film. I've got a lot of time to pick a career in some sense. I'm only 21.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I'm going to take a couple to figure out whether ministry or film or law or government, some like political campaigning is where God would sort of have me to use my gifts. I'm not sure, but I'm okay waiting to figure that out.
Right. Well, I think you have a talent for bringing up, things that people don't want to talk about, but they need to be talked about, which is a wonderful thing. And
Thank you.
I believe you have a very bright future ahead of you. All right. Well, I just want to thank you once again for letting me interview you, and good luck with your future. And thank you for discussing the topic of your documentary, The Flag, today. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Sure. It was a pleasure talking with you too. I wish good luck to the Arlington Film Festival, and I had an awesome time there last year. So I'm looking forward to seeing what new art premieres there this year.
Yes, me too. And that's coming up in October of 2017. And they
Awesome.
are opening their doors for submitting documentaries. Hopefully they'll
Beautiful.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Tyler.
better
You have a great day, and thanks again for talking.
Sure, you too. Have a good night.
You too. Thanks.